Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar, Exploring the Divine Connections Between Religion and Restorative Justice, an Interfaith panel. My name is DeMointe Wesley. I'm a student at the Center for Justice and Peace Building and a volunteer for the Zehr Institute. I'm going to be sharing a little bit with you about how today will go. And after that, I'll be passing it off to our host, Dr. Karen Leslie Hernandez. So again, Dr. Hernandez will introduce each speaker. There will be a presentation by each of the speakers. Then at the end, there will be a Q&A session moderated by Dr. Hernandez. So please do add any questions that you have on any platform that you're joining us from, and we will make sure that those get added to the lineup. Then I will be passing it, or Dr. Karen will be passing it over to Professor Tariq Masrani for announcements and then a closing. So thank you again for joining us. And I would like to take this time to introduce Dr. Karen Leslie Hernandez. With over 17 years of experience, both in the US and internationally in peace building, as well as in interfaith understanding and collaboration, Karen brings practical, academic, and experiential expertise to her interfaith and restorative justice work. With vast experience in multi-religious and multicultural bridge building, she is a boundary-breaking, religiously intelligent scholar practitioner with cross-cultural fluency. Karen graduated with her Doctor of Ministry from Claremont School of Theology in 2021, where she designed an RJ component to interfaith peace building for the United Religions Initiative for her doctoral project. Karen currently works as Program Officer of Partnerships and Interreligious Education for Religions for Peace International, and she is a certified domestic violence advocate. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Karen.
Thank you so much, DeMonte. It's just really wonderful to be here, and I'm excited to share this time with my colleagues and former professors and friends. And so I just really appreciate this introduction and just being here with all of you. So thank you so much. I would love to, before I start, just introduce who is going to be joining us today. Our first guest is Professor Najiba Saeed. JD, and not only is she an amazing, wonderful practitioner of restorative justice practices, but she's also a former professor of mine from Claremont School of Theology. So I have learned a great amount from Professor Saeed. And she is currently the inaugural El Hibri endowed chair and full professor and executive director of the Interfaith Institute at Augsburg. And she has been a professor and expert practitioner and public speaker for the last 2 decades in the fields of conflict resolution, interfaith studies, mediation, education, deliberative democracy, social gender, and racial equity. So thank you so much for being here, Najiba. And then we also have joining us today another friend and colleague of mine who I've worked with in the past on State of Formation, as well as the Journal for Interreligious Studies, and that is Rabbi Joshua Stanton. And Rabbi Joshua is the Director of Leadership and Formation at the CLAL, which is the National Jewish Center for Learning and Leadership and Spiritual Leader of the East End Temple in Manhattan. He is the co-author of Awakenings, American Jewish Transformation in Identity, Belief, and Belonging, and has had interviews, articles, and reflections highlighted in media in over a dozen languages. So thank you so much, Rabbi Joshua, for joining us. And last but not least, Rana Sodi is with us. I hope, I'm not sure if he has been able to join us yet. Yes, it looks like he is. And so Rana, I met Rana many years ago in Utah at the Parliament of the World's Religions, where he told the story, which he will tell today, of why he does this important restorative work in interfaith. And he is well known in his community in Arizona as an activist and Sikh leader following the death of his brother, Balbir Singh Sodi, and which his brother was America's first post 9/11 hate crime. And so since then, Rana has spoken all over the United States and the world about Sikhism and the peace that comes within his tradition, and the importance of building bridges and forgiveness and reconciliation and restorative practices. So thrilled to have Rana joining us today too. So thank you so much, all three of you, for being here. And I'm going to start today with just kind of an introduction to this work, why it's important that we work not only within our own faith context, but also within an interfaith context, and the importance of why our faith traditions and as faith leaders and lay people, we can change these narratives that we have around justice. First of all, I would just love to thank, though, the Zehr Institute for asking me to host this webinar. After I finished my doctorate, I sent my doctorate to Howard Zehr, and I guess he thought it was great. And so he sent it on to the Zehr Institute, and here I am hosting this webinar. So he's also connected me with other people in the movement. And so just being able to connect with this restorative justice movement, which is small but mighty, is so important, because this work really is paramount to our ability to forgive and to reconcile and to be able to practice in a way, these practices in a way that are holistic and forgiving, and again, changing those narratives. So thank you again. What I have learned as I've gone through this process, especially as a Christian, is that every faith tradition tells us in one way or another that we are divine, we are sacred, we are all holy humans. And within that, every faith has some sort of restorative practice, restorative words, forgiveness, reconciliation. There is not a faith or indigenous practice on the planet that does not have this tenet of practice. The reality is, however, is that we get lost in our narratives, we get lost in our systematic way of viewing justice that is normal. We are punitive, we are retributive, we are revengeful, and we learn all of these things at a very early age as little humans. And it's a process that I have found that we need to change in regard to how we teach our children to view justice. And that's a huge order. We all know this. And it will take many years to get to where I would hope that we would get to eventually. But I believe that it's possible. And I believe that it's possible to see beyond those narratives, and that we instill upon each other that are cultural, as I said, systematic, etc. My introduction to restorative justice occurred when my daughter was in high school. But after that, I actually took a class at Boston University School of Theology in restorative practices in a theological context, looking at restorative practices within Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. And it was a very eye-opening class for me. We had a guest speaker who came in who, she lives in Maine. Her son was killed in a drug deal gone bad, and Maine offers restorative justice practices. And so she decided to approach this in a restorative way. 3 men murdered her son. 2 of the men who took part in that process, that restorative process, went to prison, stayed in touch with her. They worked through everything that they needed to work through, got out of prison. They now have families, they now have jobs, they are able to live their lives. The one man who chose not to go through the restorative justice process has been in and out of prison. More, though, the woman that I met and that spoke to us in class struck me so deeply because she has coffee with the 2 men who murdered her son, and once a year or so, and she sends Christmas cards. And for me to listen to her story and understand that reality of how this practice within her faith context, she was Christian, allowed her to not only forgive the men who caused such great harm to her and her family, but the grace that came with that and the peace that she had within herself. And it was just such a lesson for me to listen to her. When I wrote my doctorate, I looked a lot at the Maori structure within New Zealand and their idea of restorative practices, and how really much of the New Zealand justice system, if you will, is based on Maori tradition and Maori practices. And that's really important. Those indigenous practices that we have lost within our faith context, for me, have struck me as well in regard to how we can move backward, if you will, to be able to move forward and understand how these practices are so holistic, and how they offer us the opportunity again to view justice and restorative practices in a different way that allow us healing and allow us the ability to give us the space to think and act and react differently. I have a saying that I used in my doctoral thesis is hurt people, healed people, heal people. And that is so true in so many different contexts. That can be true within your home and your family and your relationships with your parents or your sister or siblings or cousins or whatever it is that you are struggling with. But that can also be very true for an international conflict, if you're looking at how harm is caused all the way over on the other side of the world, or even within your own community. Here in the United States, as we all know, we have a major problem with gun violence. And so taking that idea of how to heal oneself and address the trauma within oneself is something that I really delved into while looking at restorative practices, and understanding how really, until we heal ourselves personally, there is really no way that we will heal and not cause harm in other parts of the world, because it has to begin with us each individually. And as a Christian, when I'm looking at the parables, or when I'm looking at the examples that Jesus left us, everything Jesus did within the context of what we can read in the Bible is reconciliatory, is restorative, is based on forgiveness, is based also on understanding. There are so many parables that allow us to understand the history and the context of someone who has caused harm. And what I have realized within this context and within this work is that if we don't understand why somebody causes harm, then if we address it afterwards, if we don't look at it before it happens and try to change why it's happening, then again, on the other side, it's just going to keep happening, and we're going to keep reacting in this way of with retribution and with revengeful and harmful thoughts. So when we seek to understand why, the way I understand is that it clears a way for us to understand and comprehend those we encounter in a much more holistic way. And more importantly, it changes the narrative. It changes our own narrative, and it changes that collective narrative that we exist in. And so when we understand why somebody has murdered, when we understand why people justify oppression and violence, it can, I hope, is allow us again to work on how to change those narratives in the first place. Again, very tall order, but that's kind of how I view it. And if we are going to look at the reality that all beings are sacred and divine, this is my understanding as a Christian. That doesn't just mean that Christians are sacred and divine. That means that all humans are sacred and divine, regardless of what they believe, regardless of their race, their ethnicity, their culture. And I am a very pluralistic Christian, and I know that. But I also feel that as a responsible person of faith, I am supposed to, and I do, recognize the divinity and the sacred in all humans. And that is a huge part of changing this narrative as well, in regard to retribution, in regard to restorative practices, in regard to allowing ourselves to exist in a different way and move through the world in a different way that is more holistic and gives us the ability to be peaceful. So with that, I would love to pass the floor to Rabbi Joshua Stanton, who is going to share his thoughts on this topic. So thank you so much.
Thank you. What an absolute joy and what an honor to be here with such wonderful colleagues. So a few reflections, and I always like to start with the difficult passages in our sacred text because I think that they often reveal remarkable truths that are surprising and sometimes counterintuitive. If you were to think of a passage from the Torah that goes against notions of restorative justice, it might be an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And that is almost exclusively a passage that is read as one line or a couple of verses, as opposed to within the broader context in which it falls. And it falls in Leviticus 24, and it has a very key foundational concept that ultimately leads to a notion of restorative justice within Judaism. And so if we move up a few lines from an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, we read, "One who kills a beast shall make restitution for it, life for life." And the word in Hebrew, yishalmena, does not mean violently. This does not mean you can go and attack another person's beast. It means you shall make the other person whole. The word shalom means wholeness, not peace necessarily in the conventional way in which we use the word today. So it means that you will remunerate, you will restore, you will bring the other person to the place that they were before they lost a large part of their livelihood, when someone killed an animal that presumably was a key source of their income. And only then does the passage go on to describe other situations. And it is very clear from the first line that the others are not intended literally, because life for a life is already placed in the context of restitution. If a party maims another person, what shall be done in return? Fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. The injury inflicted on a human being shall be inflicted in return. One who kills a beast shall make restitution for it, but one who kills a human being shall be put to death. So typically that is read as a division between injury done to someone's property versus to their personhood. But rabbinic law and rabbinic tradition hangs entirely on the first part of that sentence. There's actually not really a criminal code in rabbinic thought. It is entirely a civil code, which is its own remarkable thing. A court that puts someone to death must be disbanded, and no one who has ever served on that court can ever actually serve on a court of justice again. Moreover, if a court is unanimous, a person cannot be put to death because it means that clearly they missed something. And so in essence, over time, the death penalty was banned. And then rabbinic scholars and thinkers worked backwards, banning every other type of retribution that existed until the whole focus was on Leviticus 24:18 about making restitution. We have some beautiful quotes for that. The Ramban Nachmanides, who was very much in dialogue in unfortunate ways with Christian communities in Spain where he lived, is quoted, and the translation is not my favorite, but it's okay. This does not mean a real animal, but that he must buy him an animal similar to the one that was killed, or that he is to give him monetary compensation equal to the damage caused to him. Similarly, breach for breach, eye for eye also means monetary compensation according to the opinion of the rabbis. So that's pretty clear and pretty stark. There is also a beautiful Talmudic passage for those who love Talmud. It's from Tractate Bava Kama. And it says that the Torah states an eye for an eye. And I'll suggest a literal eye. Don't let that arise in your mind for a second. For it was taught that one who blinds an eye has his eye blinded and amputates what he has amputated. The Torah teaches you may not strike another human being. So too, the striking of a human is subject to the repayment monetarily. That is a complicated Talmudic formulation for saying there is only compensation for a person monetarily for damages and pain and suffering. And what is extraordinary, given that the Talmud was codified about 14 or 1500 years ago in what is modern day Iraq and Iran, probably around Baghdad today. What's incredible is it actually goes into pain and suffering and medical needs of the person. So what does that entail? What then is the basis legally in Jewish thought for at least a millennium and a half? It is that you need to understand the pain and the suffering of the person you have wronged. You need to acknowledge the pain and the suffering. You need to compensate them monetarily if you hurt them financially. And you need to cover the cost of the best available medical treatment to give them the greatest possibility of return to full health. So contrary to what we often think, an eye for an eye is not the basis for retribution in Jewish thought and Jewish life. One could argue ever, depending on how you read the Torah. But certainly for real close to a couple of millennia, it is the basis for restorative justice that takes into account the needs and the feelings of the party who is wronged, that centers their emotional and physical well-being, that centers the financial pain and suffering that they might have incurred, and finds a compassionate, soulful way to ameliorate the situation.
Thank you so much, Josh. That was really interesting, and I have actually never heard that. So I'm so appreciative of that understanding of an eye for an eye, and also just the historical context, which is just so important when we're looking at theological scripture and how that all relates and how we can apply it to now. So thank you. All right, I would love to pass the floor now to Professor Najiba Saeed. Najiba, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm so delighted to be here with you, Dr. Hernandez. As she mentioned, she's a former student of mine when I was at Claremont School of Theology. So I wanted to talk a little bit. I was introduced to restorative justice when I was in law school 25 years ago and took restorative justice training on our campus, and then proceeded to, in one of my clerkships in the summer, work in a prosecutor's office on a double homicide and restorative justice practice, and then continued after law school. When I moved to Los Angeles, I did my first case of juvenile restorative justice. I walked into a room and there was a 9-year-old boy whose feet didn't even touch the ground. And he had taken some money from an ice cream truck because he was hungry that day. And this young child would have gone through our criminal justice system, but because of that restorative justice program focus on first-time folks that were engaged in the system for the first time, particularly juveniles, we were able to come up with an incredible solution. The ice cream truck driver said, "I love this boy. He's someone I know he was hungry that day. So why don't we come up with a solution where he can volunteer and I can teach him a little bit about the ice cream truck business in the neighborhood?" So those kinds of stories are really formative for me, because this idea that the community is responsible and engaged and involved, and part of the ethic of whether you are a religious person or you're not a religious person, that there's a capacity to think about what holds us together, and that which holds us together also should play into when a harm has been done. So that story, I always think of it when I think about restorative justice, that what our country does to children. We're a country that incarcerates or puts children in a criminal justice system. So I won't delve into that, but I wanted to just briefly mention that for me, restorative justice operates at the interpersonal level between people, at the community level, meaning at the communal level, and at the structural level, so that structures of society also function to either harm or restore, and that we are all responsible for those as well. So there are about 7 virtues that I wanted to talk about for restorative justice and those that engage in Muslim practice. And my graduate students, similar to Dr. Hernandez and others, Imam Jihad Safir, who works in South LA, have taken these restorative justice practices and utilized them in their mosques, churches, synagogues, and places of worship. I was with Imam Jihad at his school. I took my graduate students to visit his school in South LA, and there were a group of students in a circle, and one child had taken a cell phone from someone else, and these third to fifth graders sat for almost 2 hours. And I'm telling you, I've taught classes. They sat and they came up with a community solution for the cell phone that was taken. So it was really beautiful, and it's a school, a Muslim day school, so it's really beautiful. So I'll go really just kind of how I approach the work, since I work in both secular and religious settings and interfaith settings utilizing restorative justice. These are some of the principles that I draw on when I'm working in Muslim or interfaith settings. So really, I think of them as virtues. And the first one is that compassion is both a virtue and a mission in the Muslim tradition. The Quran tells us in 21:07 that we, meaning God, has sent you, O Prophet, meaning Prophet Muhammad, only as a source of compassion for the whole world. And scholars translate the alameen part of that verse as to all people, all beings, but it's this idea that it's not exclusive just to Muslims. And for those of us that work in both Hebrew and Arabic, we know that the word compassion, which I think is often loosely translated and probably inaccurately as mercy in the early translations of the Quran into English, I use the word compassion for rahma, which is from the root verb, the root triliteral term of rahama, which is both womb in Hebrew and in Arabic. So this idea of a source of compassion, like that which a mother who carries a child. It's a really beautiful analogy that I often use in my work. So virtue is both manifested not just in having compassion, but in demonstrating compassion, and not just to Muslims, but to all. So there's no designation of a religious community that reflects my own. Another virtue is that the way that we practice compassion and restorative justice is really tied to our piety. So there's a beautiful saying, and for those who don't know, for Muslims, our highest spiritual authority is the Quran, and then we engage the oral tradition as recorded in different canons, what are called the hadith, or the sayings of the Prophet and the life of the Prophet. So that's why if someone tells me just read this ayah or read this verse of the Quran and explain it, I say, we'll have to go out. There's a whole set of questions that I have to ask, whether it applies to all people, all time, just that time, just these people. What was the Prophet's practice? What did the Prophet say? So that's part of the process of engaging our text. And I think part of what we'll learn today is we engage both practice and text from the Muslim viewpoint, not just the text of the Holy Book, but the practice of the Prophet. So one of the beautiful sayings of Prophet Muhammad is that whoever is not compassionate to those on earth, those in the heavens will not be compassionate to them. So this idea that we have to be, our human interaction has to show rahmah or compassion, or else God will not be compassionate to us. So you could fulfill every divine or sort of ordinance of prayer, of almsgiving, of whatever it may be, but if you walk around and you're horrific to your employees, or you're not kind or compassionate to other people in your life, then that is not a virtuous life. And so I think that's really beautiful that God pays attention to how we engage with other human beings. And again, the designation here is not just Muslims, but the designation is all human beings. The other virtue that I think, the third virtue that I wanted to talk about, is there's a virtue to not being tied to the position of oppression of others. And that's where I think the structural part of restorative justice is important. It's not just how I get along with other people, but it's the structures and that I support or I'm a part of. So Prophet Muhammad tells us to beware of the supplication of the oppressed, for there is no veil between the supplication of the oppressed and God. So those that are oppressed have a sacred relationship, an immediate relationship to God. So you don't want to be on the side of the oppressor, because those that are oppressed, there is an immediate kind of connection to God, this sacred. We talked about what is sacred. There's another saying of Prophet Muhammad where someone came and asked him, what is the best form of jihad? And as we know, there are many Muslim men named jihad, and partly because the word jihad for us does not translate as holy war, it translates as spiritual exertion. So someone came to the Prophet and asked, what's the best form of jihad or spiritual exertion? And his answer was to tell a word of truth to an oppressive ruler. So this idea of standing on the side with those engaging, being present, and supportive in systems that do not oppress and in fact liberate is very important. And to not engage necessarily, or to not think of it as, to think of it as a nonviolent struggle. So to speak truth, I think that's also a form of restoration, that it's not about overthrowing that ruler, but it's speaking truth. Another, just a couple of closing stories. Another thing that I think is really important is this idea of the virtue of strength is not in domination over others, but in actually restraining our anger. So someone came to the Prophet and asked for advice, and he said, do not become angry. And he repeated this 3 times. On another occasion, the Prophet asked his companions and said, do you know who the strong person is? And the companions said something to the effect of, those who can wrestle other people down. The Prophet responded, no, it is actually the one who is able to control their anger. So restraint being a form of strength. And I think that that's particularly important at the interpersonal, community, and structural level in this day and age, where strength is often defined as the capacity to harm or restrain others instead of oneself. And I think I'll end here with this idea of forgiveness as a virtue. And I think Rabbi Josh Stanton has already articulated that. The Quran tells us in 1626, punish with an equivalent of that which you were harmed. But if you are patient, it is better for those who are patient. And then this is an interesting reference to the text that he spoke about from our text, the Quran 5:45. And we have ordained for them therein a life for a life, an eye for an eye, a nose for a nose. Our texts were so literal, so it had to be so specific. An ear for an ear, a tooth for a tooth, and wounds is legal retribution. But if anyone remits the retaliation by way of charity, it shall be for him an expiation. And whosoever does not judge by that which God has revealed, such are the wrongdoers. So this idea that actually choosing, and we have in the Muslim legal thought alternatives to criminal or harm, the idea that a family that has been harmed can make a choice for forgiveness or some kind of financial compensation, and there are very specific crimes for that, is a really beautiful example of virtue again, instead of retribution, this idea of restorative justice. And I wanted to point out, and this I'll end with that, is that it seems like an interpersonal form of forgiveness, that instead of when this very violent act happened to my family, it seems like it's just an interpersonal forgiveness, but it's in fact a structural form of forgiveness, because what it does is encourage systems that do not seek the killing of other human beings as a form of punishment. So I wanted to point that out. It could be cumulative over time, but it is something for us to begin to think about. What are those interpersonal practices that actually help us think about systems and virtues that are deeply concerned about using violence to stop violence? How do we interrupt those circles of violence? And I think our spiritual traditions give us these tools for forgiveness. I often talk about it as a superpower. You can forgive a lot more if you have a spiritual source than you could if you were just in that human capacity. So I'll end there, and I have comments later, but I'm interested to hear from my co-panelists.
Thank you so much, Professor Najiba. Just everything you said is so relevant. And one thing I neglected to mention was that I did have 2 courses with Najiba at Claremont, and much of what I included in my doctoral thesis is what she has just talked about and what I learned from you. So thank you so much. I'm just really appreciative. Thanks. All right, I would love to now pass the floor to Sri Rana Singh Sodhi, who is going to talk about how within his tradition restorative practices are recognized. So thank you so much, Rana, for being with us. I will pass the floor to you.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Rabbi Josh and Nazim. Your beautiful story, and joining with you. I feel blessed to be part of this panel. And Karen, you're amazing how we connected in Utah and Salt Lake, and so many years. We still, good friend. And today I want to share my story. I grew up in India, uh, Sikh faith in Punjab, basically northeast of India. And in our family, my family don't believing to go out of the country because my father-in-law very against to be go, especially my family came from 1947 from when India and Pakistan were separated, and so many people was killed. It's kind of genocide. People that time 1947 in the separation the both country because the Muslim and Hindu they decide to be a separate country, and we are the minority.
It looks like we might have lost Rana. I'm not quite sure. Rana, we lost your picture and your voice. Okay, well, let's hope that Rana comes back. All right.
Grown up. When I
go.
grown up. Hello.
Go ahead. We lost you just for a minute, but go ahead. Keep going. Thank you.
So I grew up in India, and when I was young, and our golden temple was attacked by Indian army, and the population of Sikh in India is less than 2%, and that time there's a lot of fake encounter. There's agitation go in our state to the central government state, and a lot of people suffer, and a lot of young people involved with this agitation, and the government killed so many young children 1984 with a fake encounter. And that time our family first decided to move out from that country, and that in 1984 our prime minister was killed, one of two of their bodyguard who was happened to have sick, and then a retaliation to that prime minister killing, thousands of Sikh was killed and burned alive in New Delhi and some other city of India in 1984, right in front of the law enforcement. Thousands of Sikh was killed. I believe that is genocide. And that time, all the parents, Sikh parents, they want to move their children out from that country. And that time, our family first tried to be safe and to be practice our religion. We choose to be come to United States. And until today, none of those Sikh family who was killed in that 1984, until today nobody get justice from any justice system from India. That's the sad part of the of that story though. And when my family moved in 1985, 84, 86, then all, one time we are five brother moved from India to America and working, enjoy our life. When Nazib telling the story, I'm one of the ice cream vendor in 1989 in Los Angeles streets. I do was a ice cream truck and selling ice cream in beginning of my life, and working on a 7-Eleven at night shift, and daytime I selling ice cream and in the truck. That was when you telling the story and touching my heart, because how hard we to be work hard to be establish ourselves, to be have a successful life and fulfill our dream. And I thought when I move in America, I thought I move in a beautiful country. It's wonderful, a lot of opportunity. You can work hard and enjoy the life. Only one incident changed my whole thought. And when 9/11 happened, and totally it's hurt me, when somebody came to my brother and he saw his turban and shot him and killed him, and he thought he's part of those terrorists who attacked to our country on 9/11. And that incident, when I see that so much ignorance in our country, I don't think before this in my mind there's a lot of ignorance in our country and a lot of hatred people living in this country. I thought I move in a well civilized community, well civilized country. But after 9/11, that's the first time I learned it, how ignorance exists in our community. I didn't know that before that. And that really hurt me, because we trying to survive from India to move in a better place, and then we still lost. And after 10 months, and I lost my another brother. In 1 year, I lost my true brother with hate. And that kind of gave me so much depression that time. And but the love from the community, from the leadership, law enforcement, and justice system make you strong. And I think I get love from a lot of from the local community here in Arizona and law enforcement. I always remember one person who changed my life. He was the ADL regional director for Arizona. His name is Bill Strauss. We become a brother after my death of my both brothers. And he, the person who encouraged me to come out from the grief and tell the story and change this world with love. And I think in my Sikh religion, Guru Nanak, who was the first founder born in 1469, he spread the love to the whole world. He started walking from India to Iraq and Baghdad to spreading the love. I think the love is the only word can change the people and bring the whole community and whole world together. I learned it when I was talking to family of the person who killed my brother, and when I invite them to the dinner to my brother gas station to have a join with them, and this person and change after 15 years, and we both cry, and that one word is really touched me when he said that when I'm die, I'm going to the God and ask Jesus to one word. I want to hug your brother and say sorry to him what I did to him. And I think that the love changed his life. And in our Sikh religion is being, if you not being practice your religion, if you're a good human being, you don't need to be a religious person. It's written in our holy book, written by Guru Nanak, and he mentioned in our holy book, if you're a good human being, you don't be a religious person. And I think right now, our society, our country, our world need more love, and that changing the people life, not hate. And I see it, and I see from my whole religion background, our faith guru teach, and they set up the example to serving the water and bend it to the enemies while they're in the fight also. So we have a lot of example of that. And I believe so in today, in our nation, our young generation need love, respect, and understanding to each other. Then we make a wonderful with this world. Thank you very much. I hope, and I definitely, I think I always look at Dr. Martin Luther King. He had a dream to change the life of the Black community. And I feel so proud. His dream was fulfilled when Barack Obama was elected president to this nation. And I had a dream one day we can finish the hate to this world and to our country, to make this beautiful country and make this community more lovable to each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rana. Just really just your story is so moving, and it's an example of how we can take a different path when harm comes to us personally, to our families, to our communities. And I think that's one of the biggest problems. We're going to move into kind of more of a discussion with each other, and I would love to hear examples from each of us. But I had mentioned earlier, one thing that I learned when my daughter was in high school, she was a junior at Lincoln Sudbury High School, and this is public record. And a young man came to school that day with the intention of killing anyone. And he brought a knife with him, and his name was John Odgren, and he murdered a freshman named James Allenson in the bathroom of my daughter's high school. And it was horrible. My daughter actually happened to be home that day, and the events unraveled on television, and it was just a very surreal moment. We heard we live in this town. How could this happen? Well, the reality is it can happen anywhere. And so what I learned from that, though, is, I was a part of a church community there in Massachusetts. And my first reaction was, how did this happen? And my next reaction was, somebody needs to reach out to both families. The Allenson family, James' son is, James is the one who died, and the Odgren family. John is the one who killed James. The Allenson family left immediately. They left Sudbury. They never looked back. They literally moved out of town that day. So I was unable to reach them, but I was able to reach the Odgrens. And as I sought people from my church community to go to visit with the Odgrens, because the reality is that although both were very different, both families that day lost a son in very different, horrible ways. And no one from my church community would go with me. And at first I was really taken aback by that, and I didn't understand. As a Christian, this is what I felt my religion tells me I need to do. And I got a lot of negativity. I got a lot of we can't do that. I'm not ready for that. As I look back on that now, I understand, because that is what we do. We just cannot cross that boundary to offer that reaction, that action, as easily as it is for us just to shut down and say, no, I'm not going to do this. They don't deserve our attention. I found one parent from the high school to go with me, and we sat with the Odgrens, and it was really uncomfortable, and it was horrible. They had been receiving death threats, people driving by their home. It was hard. John was sentenced to life in prison, and yet it was such a learning experience for me to just sit with someone who had no idea what to do next, and who wanted to be able to fix things but had no idea how to. And obviously just devastated that their son had done this, but obviously devastated that they had also lost their son that day too. Just a prime example of how do we live in our traditions, and but really offer these restorative practices. So I don't know if anybody would like to, Najiba or Josh or Ron, if you'd like to jump in and maybe share a story about how what you faced when you were trying to do this work within your tradition. But I would love to hear anything you might have to share. Anyone? Josh?
Yeah, so an interesting phenomenon that I experience on the collective is that whenever I meet a German person, they immediately apologize for the Holocaust. And in my mind, the moment that, wouldn't say I got over it, there is no such thing, but the moment that I found peace with Germany as a country, and with the German people of my generation and generations that were not alive during World War II was after Angela Merkel, the chancellor, allowed in 1 million refugees from Syria. And in my mind, that was the closest thing Germany could possibly do as a country that had lived based on or even innovated in the space of white supremacist doctrine that categorized Jews as racially inferior and other, is doing atonement and doing the change work and making me feel some sense of acknowledgement that was more than memorial and was more than a reflection on the past, but a way of showing change that was prospective. And so I really keep that with me in terms of not restitution, but work that can be restorative, at least in part, at a national level. And it makes me wonder about reparations in America and what that could look like. It makes me wonder about sort of taking that notion of reparations apart. What is most impactful for the individuals who continue to be impacted by racism and hate in our country? And I say that as an open question, but was really awed by Chancellor Merkel's example and as sort of the closest I have seen to reparations that really were profound and moving and enduring.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful. Thank you. Najiba, would you like to add something?
Sure. I was thinking, and there's a question in the chat about the connection, and I think Josh is making that between, it's also a principle, I think, of communal responsibility of halakhic law too, but this idea of the connection between the interpersonal, the community, and the structural. And so I think there are a couple of examples. Imam al-Ghazali, who's a very important scholar in the Muslim tradition, talks about this idea of empathy is based on actually having to feel the pain of someone else. And one of the things that I think is really important to talk about in the restorative justice space is the issue of racism, and whether it's xenophobia against immigrants in a particular country, or whether it's in the United States, anti-Black racism. One of the things that really struck me is sociologists talk about this empathy gap, that there is a perceptible, measurable lack of empathy for the pain that people who have Black embodiment experience. That there is, one can study and recognize that when images of Black bodies in pain are portrayed, that there are people respond to those images in a way that assume that those people don't experience the same level of pain as other people. And that plays into so many implications, whether it's Black maternal health, as we see now, or the shootings that we have seen rampantly. It's really important that we think about the connection of what and how someone perceives one other person is influenced by the lens that we bring, and whoever that we is defined in different situations, but the lens of racism that forms individuals. And something I wanted to say really quickly here is the World Health Organization talks about the moments of the best pro-social anti-racism programs are actually from the age of 0 to 5. So we're imprinted for love, or we're imprinted for hate from the age of 0 to 5. And I think that's a profound justification for being in spaces and places of diversity and cross-community, interfaith, intercultural, interracial conversation and collaboration. You can't wait. It's too late. Like you were talking about hate that manifests. It's too late to wait till high school. And I just want to point out here, and I'll end, that, one of the things that Malcolm X also taught us was that the structural piece should extend outside the United States. So he said, violence that's wrong abroad should also be wrong in the U.S. What the U.S. perpetrates abroad and perpetrates in the U.S. should be morally equivalent in our lenses. And I wanted to add that to the structural piece, is when we talk about restorative justice, how open is the conversation, not just to the harms that have happened in the borders of the US, but the harms that have happened in other places. And I think the transnational aspect of these structures, and can we think about structures over time that would allow for more of these conversations? And that's where transformative justice, transitional justice, and healing justice are fascinating to me, not just in our communities here. And I always tell people that peacemakers in the cities of the US that I work with in gang intervention, they need Nobel Prizes too, you know. So this idea of the virtues, again, this of virtues of peace and the problems of violence, how narrow is our construction on who is impacted by it? And so I'll stop there. Those are just rambling thoughts.
No, that's great, and you're right. It's very connected. I have a friend who works in gang rehabilitation in El Salvador, you know, and works very closely with Homeboy here in LA, and that connection is just the city peacemakers are those that we don't even really think of. But the reality is too is that all the people around the world who are doing this work that we don't even know, right? And they are contributing to these practices and to this movement that without them we'd be so much worse off than we are, and we kind of lose that. So thank you. Rana, did you want to add anything else to this?
I think I believe that education is very important in the initial stage, and especially in the United States, different people, different faith, different culture, different country. There's so many melting pot people living in United States. The lack of education, people don't understand different people culture, their faith. I believe it. And we had done research after the death of my brothers, and 89% of the people, they never interact with Sikh people in America. They don't know who are the Sikhs are. See, 89% people. And that uneducation, ignorance create more problems. I think our education system to need be a little more uplift, to be more educational from 0 to 5 year age, what Nazib say. You know, they need to be understand who are these people. They are part of our family. They are part of our community. They are part of our nation. And they are not stranger. That's the way I look at. I think in our education system need to be more wider, not on religion based, at least community and faith or whatever they need to educate their new generation to who's this turban person, who's this hijab person, who's this zakam, you know, all the Jewish people have those things. It's nothing wrong to educating people to each other believing. I don't think anything wrong, but I don't know. Our system don't allow those things, which one creating more problems. And also another thing, I think opening dialogue, communication, bring people more closer. And if anybody have a question, if they don't clear it, that's not good for the community. So anything in whenever I go to talk, I love to have a people question if they have any question about me, about my faith, about my community. If they nobody ask, nobody can make this clear. Communication and education is very, very important. I believe so.
Thank you so much, Rana, and I agree. And in fact, why don't we now transition to questions from our viewers? And one of the questions is really interesting, and it says someone from Lisa Morgenstern is someone who's volunteered and led services for Pagan in prison. How can we help those people who are incarcerated learn while inside and continue as they are released? And then your comment below is, you know, how it's been eye-opening. I actually volunteered at the Federal Correctional Institute in Dublin. I tutored women who were in prison getting their GED. And it was, as you said, incredibly informative and enlightening. And every single woman I spoke to in that program had almost the exact same story. They, many of them had learning disabilities that were never defined. They grew up already in violent neighborhoods. They couldn't read. Their teachers didn't teach them to read. They were passed from grade to grade to grade. By the time they got to high school, they were angry at the world, living in a violent neighborhood again. Their teachers would call on them in class. They couldn't answer because they couldn't read. And so they were angry at the world, dropped out, ended up doing whatever it is they chose to do in regard to crime, joining gangs, selling drugs, ended up in prison. Almost every single woman I spoke to had that exact same story. And what it told me was, we are failing our children in the educational system, especially women and young girls. And what other choices do they really have? And how can we help, not necessarily us help make better choices, but how can that whole systematic issue within our educational system and within our communities that are not addressed as they should be, that are not given the resources they should be given, and how that all plays into everything we're talking about today, and how we can take our faith tradition and utilize that in a way that is holistic and act within our faith. And so that was something that was really enlightening to me. And there are so many structures in place right now and organizations in place right now that are working within those contexts to try to offer, rehabilitation and the ability for those who get out of prison to have housing, to have access to jobs, all of the things they need to be able to live productive lives. And unfortunately, our system, as Najiba has pointed out, is not welcoming and friendly. And so again, it has to be this systematic change. It can't just be all of an individual. It has to be this massive and systematic change, and it can be very overwhelming. But would love to see if Najiba or Josh or Rana want to add anything to what I've just spoken about in this question. No?
Okay. So one of the things that I appreciate about rabbinic thought and law is that it tries to bring into tension competing principles. And what I'm hearing is a lack of emphasis on compassion,
Yes.
a lack of emphasis on empathy at a systemic level, and sort of a tendency to focus solely on justice from the standpoint of the aggrieved party. And I think that that's a very helpful corrective. At the same time, I would probably be remiss in saying that justice also matters a great deal. And that includes caring for the needs of the aggrieved party. And my only concern at all in this conversation is decentering the aggrieved. And the problem there is, in some ways, it provides attention, and potentially even positive reinforcement for doing things that are not pro-social. And so just wanted to put it out there that those principles remain in tension. And what I love is the notion that we need to shift where we are in the interplay between those two.
Thank you. Very, very important. Accountability is what comes to my mind. Thank you. Thanks. Anybody wanted to add anything, Najiba?
Yeah, and I think we have to also ask, this is to me like to get to Josh's perspective, because I think justice is embedded in all of our traditions. And I would point out that we're also working in multilingual settings. So a lot of the concepts that I've quoted are originally in Arabic and have certain connotations and histories and interpretations. And so this is the idea of justice, it's not universally, the metaphor in the Quran is a mizan, the idea of justice being a balance. And from Surah Rahman, which is the source of compassion, the idea that it's also a balance. It's not always a scale, but a balance, and that human beings are often the ones that transgress the balance. That surah or that verse the verses in that chapter of the Quran really talk about nature quite a bit, and how all forms of nature are actually in balance. And it's human beings have the agency in our tradition to break the balance. It talks about the trees, they bend their shadow to prostration to God. They don't have the choice. Human beings, we have that choice and that agency to either be a part of the balance of justice or to transgress it. So I say all of that because I think one of the bigger questions when I step back and look at that interpersonal community and the other piece that of structural is to say, well, the structures that we have in place, do they give a voice to the aggrieved? And I'm not sure that that's even the case. So certainly, I think you're right, Rabbi Stanton, to talk about the fact that we have to always keep that, if someone has been harmed, whether it's Zehr's model of restorative justice or other models, thinking about the work of Fania Davis and others, healing justice, there's so many iterations now of how we talk about this work. I would ask, well, is incarceration giving a voice? Is incarceration, what do you do? Like in the cases I've worked in with quadruple, the first case I worked on was a family that experienced a homicide of other family members. And it went, and this was, I did this after my first year of law school. And that was the first case I worked on for a restorative justice process and a victim impact statement. And it really struck me that this family suffered the loss of two family members, and they were about to suffer the loss of the person who perpetrated it. So I think part of the question is, is there a voice in the ice cream truck incident that I brought up, and I've done many, many other cases, what is termed victim offender mediation, which is also changed in language. And it was amazing because what struck me is the aggrieved had a voice in that process. So I just want to put that out there too, is asking the question of, are our systems of justice both stacked against those that might have harmed, and are they also actually including and engaging and responding effectively to those that have been aggrieved and giving them a voice? Meaning, hearing Rana's story, that he was able to meet with this individual. That's not the case all the time, that you're able to do that. And I also just wanted to take a moment to thank you, Rana, for your incredible story. And it's just, it's incredibly inspiring. And, I just wanted to take a moment to say how sacred and holy your journey is. And, and that it is a lifelong journey. So
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you both. Rana, did you want to add anything to this before we go to closing?
I think our community need. I think the crime and the drug in our community, and people and our families don't have so much love when the children, our new generation, grown up. I believe it, and because they don't have so much love and connection with the community and the family, that's creating more problem. That's, I believe it. And I think our young generation getting away from those love, support, family, and community, and all those things. I think if we all, as a collective community, helping each other, to your neighbor, your family, to be educating, talking with them with love and respect, I think it'd be change a lot. And I don't think only we put the people in the prison, in the prison, and to solve this problem. Because going in the prison, if we don't have a good prison system in the detention center, you don't give them good education in the detention center, they come out from the prison is more dangerous, because they meet and greet those more criminal in the prison. And I believe so we should have a good prison system, then there can educate them in the prison, and they become a good human being when they come out from prison, though. But I see most of the cases, the people who in the prison, and when they come out, they are more dangerous to the community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ron. That is a problem, and that does happen. And so again, it's kind of how we need to restructure, that school to prison pipeline and all of those things that exist in regard to contributing to our justice system, right? In that realm. So. Okay, well, it looks like we don't have any more questions, so would love to just pass the floor to Najiba. If you have any closing comments, would love to.
Yeah, I wanted to speak to, just out of personal experience, that one thing that has really been powerful for me working all over the world when my kids are getting older, so I'm able to travel again. But there was a period of time where I remember I traveled to another country where there had been stabbings in their high schools, and I got off the airplane. I was almost 8 months pregnant, and that stopped my travel as much internationally, and I've really been focused on the work across the U.S. I just want to add the role of women in this work is really, really powerful. And Yasmin Saika's work, Atin Anwar's work in the volume edited by Zain Qasim, talking about the idea that women are not just, as it's been fascinating to me that in so many conflicts that I've worked in, it's women who have lost a child that will be the first to cross the boundaries and seek restoration over retribution. And unfortunately, what happens when then we come to the point of actually negotiating peace, then they're left out of that. And that happens all over the world. When I was talking about doing gang intervention work, it was women that would often be the safe house in the community. A grandmother was the actual peacemaker in the community that was bringing people from different parts of the neighborhood and having conversations who may not have felt safe together, or whether it's working in other countries. So I wanted to point that out because I do think that's something that's really important, is to think about folks and women that have played a role in stepping forward and crossing those lines where they choose forgiveness as the path towards reconciliation. And so I just wanted to mention that Anwar's work is in an edited volume by Zain Qasim on Muslim women, and someone's asking me about it. So I do teach that. And Yasmin Saika writes about storytelling and women in the history of South Asia. So I just want to put that kind of gloss on all of this. Is, I think, in addition to utilizing restorative practices, also restorative justice processes, which do exist legally, truth and reconciliation and other forms that really, it's unfortunate where I've seen women do the work on the ground to get us there. And then we've actually had to work, the United Nations has had to think about more and more who's at the table. And there is an affirmative move and push to recognize that women are not at the table when it comes to actually conciliation in its legal structure. And so I wanted to point that out.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that very much. And that is a very real concern. So thank you. Rana, did you want to add any final words?
In my heart, I think from I learned it, that when we have a good justice system, is give peace to the family of the victim most of the time. I feel in my family and my community, when justice serve and when we compare back to in India, what happened 94, none of the family got justice when Sikh was killed 1984. That when I compare that, then I feel so proud to be part of this great nation that justices serve and it give peace to the community. And I'm adding to the Nazi what she mentioned about the role of the women. I always learned from my mother. Women have so much power to be things to do right in their home, in this world. And if they put their role in there. And is, people always talk about each success man behind there's a woman's, right? So it's 100% right. All the women's, if they put, especially in the home, in the family, mostly kids was influ and get love from the mother, grandmothers, and father. In our culture, father are busy most of the time to their work, to the you know most of the time, right? But the women have a show the love, respect to their children and the grandmothers, and I think all those things we're missing, and that's reason we have a lot of troubles and going on to our young generation to coming up. And I think the love changed the world. That's, I believe so. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rona. Appreciate that so much. Rabbi Josh, final words?
Yeah, I'm reflecting on one of several trips I took to Kosovo, and I spoke with one of the people who sparked the revolution that ultimately led to Kosovo becoming its own country. And he lives in a modest home across from the site where 51 of his family members were buried. And yet, when I met with him, he seemed happy. And I asked him, I inquired of why he seems happy. And he said, look, I take my grandkids to the bus stop every day and they go to school. And that makes me really happy. And so I do wonder about the interplay between future and hope and compassion and healing from the wounds that we experience. And so it was quite a lesson to me that when there is a future and when there is a possibility for hope, sometimes there can be a greater sense of restoration, even amid losses at a level and of a sort that I could not personally imagine.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Just all beautiful, amazing, wonderful points and thoughts and words that I feel like I really just cannot even add anything more to, because this has just been such a wonderful, rich conversation. So thank you to all three of you for joining, and to our audience members for joining. And this conversation is always ongoing and continuing. So just such a pleasure to share this time with you. So I am now going to pass the floor to Professor Tarek, and he's going to make some announcements for the Zehr Institute. So thank you so much.
A hearty round of gratitudes to our speakers. Beautiful to have you bring insights from different faith traditions to restorative justice and peace building. So I'd like to take the opportunity to tell you about a few other things of relevance. First of all, after 8 years of working on this project with the United States Institute of Peace, the Salam Institute for Peace and Justice, and the Network for Religious and Traditional Peacemakers, we have finalized 4 religious peace-building action guides in a series, one on conflict analysis and religion, religion and mediation, religion and reconciliation, religion and gender. They can all be found on the USIP website and are free of charge. They're practitioner's guides, so meant to be very practical, taking into account the insights from consultations, global consultations with dozens of practitioners, religion-specific experts, as well as sort of cross-cutting gender and monitoring and evaluation specialists. So I hope you'll check that out. In addition to that, we also have, let's go to the next slide. We've got our website where you'll find recordings for all the past webinars, and then this one will be put up in the next 24 hours or so. You'll find other resources as well there on the Zehr Institute website. And then that might be concluded if we okay, no more slides on SPI. So thank you everyone for joining us. It's been a pleasure. Thank you again for our guests. Take care. We hope to see you when the webinars will take a break through the summer, but we will resume in September. And we'll have publicity on what our next season of webinars will be. Thank you so much. Much love.